Welcome, welcome, welcome. Thanks for coming back, guys. This is the Jesus Pod app. We still haven't figured it out, but we're going to get it done.
At some
for you
point,
guys.
it'll work. I don't know what's going to happen.
It is, yeah. But as always, we got Pastor Joe. I'm Chelo, and we're here to bring you the Word of God, just chopped up a little bit for you guys, right? So we got something cool for you guys. I know I say it all the time, but this is almost organic. It came. Pastor Joe saw a pod or something.
It was an article.
It was an article, okay,
yeah.
right? From the son of one of my favorite, just people in general when it comes to Christian anything. John Piper's son, Barnabas Piper.
Yep.
And he had this article that talked about growing small, intimate groups, which kind of worked for us because we come from a really small church, right?
If you didn't notice.
If you didn't notice. Which is awesome, tough, and just an experience in itself. So we wanted to use that as a platform to kind of discuss some of our personal experience and some good practices that Barnabas talks about here in his article. So what do you think about that?
I think that is what we're going to do. No, I do. I think, when I went over the article, there were just so many points in the article that I was like, yeah, that applies to us. Yeah, we can dig that. We can vibe with that. We can, that kind of hits close to home. Most of it not in a bad way, but just like a lot of the things he was saying in his article really made it resonate with things that we're familiar with, So
Absolutely.
I think it's worthwhile to just work through some of that and see how it applies to us and maybe other people who might be listening,
Yeah, one of the things that we want to do for you guys is share material too, right?
Absolutely.
We don't try to reinvent the wheel. We want to give credit where credit's due. This was a dope article, and we want to give credit to Barnabas Piper for just doing amazing work. And we also want to be able to give you guys material. We didn't just come about these things by ourselves. A lot of material is already out there, and we use it and we share it. Again, the gospel, the word of God, the material of God, all those things should be shared and shared willingly, right? So we're not plagiarizing or taking anything, but we're just lifting it up and sharing it with a little bit of twist, with a little bit of our own twist to it, right?
Yep.
So with saying that, I'm going to read his first statement almost verbatim because I think it's 100% true and 100% accurate, right? And it says, developing the kind of honest authenticity that makes small groups meaningful can be scary, takes intentionality, and is always a gift from God.
Amen. I mean, I think it kind of talks about, it kind of touches what we talked about in our last episode where we were talking about sin and how as believers, one of the things that are really, really, really crucial to fighting sin is the people that you walk with.
Absolutely.
And I think this kind of hits the nail on the head when it talks about how it requires, if you're going to fight sin, if you're going to be part of a small group and you're going to do these things, it requires, as he says here, authenticity, intentionality. And it also requires the awareness that whatever fruit, whatever blessings come out of those relationships are gifts from God.
Listen, I read it because I think it's absolutely true. I think it's from even our experience, right? It took some intentionality on the part of your mom, Pastor Nosa, on your part, to reach out to these people and develop and foster relationships that are still flourishing to the day, right? 14 years now.
Yeah.
14 years. That's really amazing. Big up to Bridge of Hope for going strong. And a lot of that falls on the lap of your mom, Pastor Nosa, and you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, I might slip and call her Mama Nosa. That's because that's what she is in my life. But she is pastor, and this is Pastor Joe. But so the first one, we'll jump right into it. A willingness to take risk.
I think that's first for a reason, because I think that's where this all kind of starts from, right? I mean, we touched on this last, and I think it kind of just segues into this after our last episode, is this idea where you have to be willing to step out of your comfort zone in these smaller groups if you really want to benefit from being a part of them. it makes no sense in being in these intimate, close groups if you're not going to step out and take risks as far as who you're willing to trust inside of those small groups, who you're willing to share with, who you're willing to encourage. And, when you don't really know someone, stepping into those spaces can feel really risky. And the reality is at times it's going to be risky. But if you're willing to risk it and you're willing to trust that God's got you, regardless what the outcome might be in the midst of those settings, I think oftentimes, more times than not really, you're going to benefit from those risks that you take, from those darings to step out of where you feel most comfortable.
Yeah. Now, fight the urge to sit there and say, well, that kind of leaves me so open and vulnerable to hypocrites and backbiters and all these other things. And absolutely, that's 100% accurate. But therein lies the risk, right? We're not telling you to blatantly stand on a table and say, this is what's going on. We're telling you to be intentional. Find like-minded people in that group. Find people who are going to walk in the word with you, not walk in the world, but in the word, right? But when it comes to taking risks, why don't you tell us a little bit about the inception of the church, right? Because that is a risk in itself. Like you and your mom deciding to...
You just turned British on me?
British mom.
My mom.
It was almost like a burp. I was like, mom. I almost said Mama Nosa again, too. I'm so used to calling her Mama Nosa.
It is what it is.
But anyway, you and your mom to step out in faith and actually decide, I want to follow God's call and develop my church.
Yeah, no, I think that's an example that you can use of being willing to take a risk, right? I mean,
yeah.
For my parents, when they started the church, with me there, of course, we stepped out in faith, believing that God was drawing us into this thing. And they were willing to open up their home for it, to start off with. It's a story that is awesome in its own right. But it was, if you ask them, it was just what you had to do. It wasn't much to it. But when you look back at it, you can see the risk that was involved there. And I think for us as believers, when we see things like that happen, that should encourage us to be willing to step into those kind of risky spaces and see what you can get out of it. And I think what's most important when you're in those kind of spaces, especially for a church like ours that's numerically not the biggest in the world, but that when you're in these kind of close knit quarters, that you're honest with each other, right? Of what you are expecting, and what you are willing to give from yourself. Be honest and be upfront. Hey, this is what I'm going to hold you guys. If you're thinking about leaders, hey, this is what I'm going to hold my leaders accountable to. And the flip side of that is, hey, this is what I expect my leaders to hold me accountable to, and be able to have that honesty where you're willing to risk maybe hurting some feelings in order to press forward into something that is that's better.
Yeah, like last week you talked about going for, or doing something for the good. God is pulling us from something that we're comfortable in for our betterment,
right?
And it may seem like it hurts.
Yeah,
that's what you're saying. But the reason why I asked you about the risk it took to start a church was because that type of risk, oftentimes, more often than not, almost pushes people to respond. You get what I'm saying? Bold risk like that, showing authenticity, like Barnabas was saying, to do something that you're authentically chasing after God. Because nobody decides, you know what? I want to give up my living room. I don't want my living room anymore. I don't want my kitchen. I don't want the downstairs of my house no more.
Right.
I want to give that up so strangers can come in here and worship the Lord.
Yeah, no, I hear you. And I think there's a reality to that when you see people willing to take risk on God, right? Like, I'm gambling on God. I'm trusting on God. However you want to phrase it, that has a an ability to, galvanize the people. Like, they were willing to trust God. They were willing to take that risk. And look what he's done for them. Look how faithful he's been to them. I'm going to take a risk. I'm going to step out. I'm going to be inspired, by that. And I think as it works for a church, it also works within groups and within building relationships. I'm going to trust this person. I'm going to step out and invest in them. Even though it might not seem on the surface to be the best investment, but I think there's something worth investing in there.
Amen. Yeah. And that was the whole point, right? Because when you get that risk-taking, life-altering belief in what God is calling you to do and what God is going to develop in your midst, you start to get people to do things that they normally wouldn't do because of that action. And then in turn, our jobs are to respond with grace. When these people do take these bold steps, right? When these people do open up, when people come to you with the things that you're asking, you say, "Bring me your broke, blind, and lame," and they come busted, broke, just lame. Mm-hmm. It is not our job to say, wag the finger and go crazy. It is our job to respond in a life-altering love that God used on the cross, that God used in his day-to-day walk with his people.
I think it kind of leads right into the second point that he writes about, respond with grace. Yep. Right? That the second point in his article was that, one, we're going to have a willingness to take risk. And then he talks about responding in those situations, in those groups with grace. We've been hanging out long enough for you to know that's kind of where I try to hover, right? Some people would think, some people have accused me of trying to hover there maybe too much, maybe not. That's him. He does that. But I just feel like that's something that as believers, last week we talked about swimming in, marinating in sin.
Practicing sin.
I think being in a small group and taking risks gives you the opportunity to practice grace. And to swim in grace and to marinate in grace and to be able to demonstrate not what cheap grace is, but what costly grace is.
Get out my mind. Right? I was going to correct that real quick, and not correct it, but preface it by saying not cheap grace, right? There is a limit to what God will take, and then there's a limit where us as believers should have to take, right? It says, if at all possible. Right. And the idea there is that when these people bare their souls, when they open up to you, right? When they share, they take that risk to be open about their addictions, to be open about their hurts, to be open about their pains, that we respond not in a finger wagging, this is no disciplina or ousted out of the church. Now there's areas and situations that are on a situation by situation basis, but for the most part, generally speaking, our job is to respond in grace. Even in correction, grace can happen in correction.
Absolutely.
Right? Like a lot of times people be like, "Oh, well, grace, you're supposed to let me go." That's not necessarily true. We can gracefully in love share our disappointment, the failure to meet expectation. We can share all these things in a way that still edifies that person and edifies your group.
Absolutely.
Because the whole point of group, of anything that's brought together for the glory of God, is just that, to glorify God and find ways to push his agenda forward. And that's to get more people towards him.
Right. No, I agree with you there. And grace is a vehicle that we can use in those settings to demonstrate that, you can be risky here, because I'm not going to condemn you over this. That doesn't mean I won't correct you. That doesn't mean I won't scrutinize you. It just means that when I do those things, I'm doing them out of a bucket of grace, as it were. Where I'm doing it not because I'm trying to be mean or harsh or cruel, but I'm doing it because I love you. And if those foundations are set, when you have those risky conversations, grace is there to let each person know it's okay.
Yeah.
It's okay. And that's when, like he talks about here, and the next subject comes up, that's when you can start asking bold questions.
Now this one was kind of my favorite, right? This was kind of my favorite because this is where this is where, like, if you ask me coaching style or leadership style, I want to ask the tough questions, right? I don't want to ask the soft, superficial questions. A lot of times, we try not to ask these questions out of a wrong idea of love.
Right.
Let's be honest, right?
No, yeah.
We say we love this person, so we're shying away from saying or asking these tough questions, and then we hold regret and sadness in our hearts.
Shoulda, coulda, woulda.
Yeah.
Right.
If I would have really asked this person, I knew something wasn't right. No, I want to be, or I want to lead with that mentality or the idea that we're gonna get together. I want to know that you're not all right. I want you to know that I'm not all right. I want us to be able to lay everything on the line and honestly want to know, Joe, how you doing? You know, Sister Becky, how's it going? What is actually going on? Right? Things like that.
Right. I mean, it's asking those probing questions. You know, how are you is a question that is asked so much, so frequently, so that we kind of, you know, I'm fine, okay. Living the dream. Yeah. You know, I mean, yeah.
Fake it till you make it.
And so while that might be a place where you want to start, I think when you have gotten comfortable in taking risk, when you have gotten to realize that operating in grace is where you are most safe, then all of a sudden asking legitimately bold questions becomes something that is, I think it just becomes second nature, where you are comfortable going past the first, you know, wall that comes up. You know, when you ask that, hey, how are you? And they go, cool. And you're like, really?
Yeah, I think Barnabas puts it really cool. Like, asking how you are is fine if you really want to know. And that's the reality of it. And it goes back to our leadership class, right? How does the leader deal and function with other people? Is he a good people person? Does he get and I don't mean people pleaser, but a people person, somebody who can relate to the people. And Barnabas in the article sits there and says, it's okay to ask that question. That some people might say, hey, that question's soft. No, if you really want to know, hearing, hey, are you okay? And the reply being, I'm fine, but the head is down, he's kicking a can, so to speak.
Right, yeah.
You know that person's not fine, and your response should be, should follow suit, right? Well, it doesn't look like it. Or why don't we sit down and talk a little bit? Want to go grab something to eat? My treat.
Always want to grab something.
And it doesn't necessarily need to be that. I know finances are tight, but that second follow-up question is probably more important than the first, right? The first one shows intentionality. Look, I want to know how you're doing. The second one says, I really want to know how you're doing, and we need to, and I think there's something else there. Your fine isn't going to cut it.
Yeah, and I think, you know, this kind of works out perfectly to keep the ball rolling forward in this, because if you're going to ask bold questions and you want to have the comfort level in asking bold questions, one of the things that I think we need to be able to do if you're going to ask bold questions is you need to be able to also be able to answer questions honestly. So you can't just be the person that goes around asking all the hard questions, and then when the hard questions come to you, you turtle up. You know what I mean? Like if you're going to be Mr. or Mrs., I want to dig deep into this. I want to help you. I want to get into the nitty gritty. Amen for that. That's cool. But you can't then on the flip side, when those questions start coming back to you, just drop the I'm fine, I'm cool. So you got to be able to go from asking bold questions to answering questions honestly.
And this goes back to a healthy church situation,
Absolutely.
or identifying leaders properly, right? Leaders can't do it all. You're getting people putting everything on you, dumping their heart out to you, right? It just doesn't, like, you can't handle that burden on your own. And I don't mean going out and telling everybody's business, but sharing the weightiness. Like, you know what? I've had a heavy week. You know what I'm saying? I had a heavy week. I can definitely use some prayer. I can definitely use some help.
Absolutely.
Or I need a reprieve. I needed to just a moment where I can vent myself or my own
Absolutely.
worries, or a moment to be alone with God.
Absolutely.
You know what I'm saying?
I agree there. And I mean, we have to be able to get to that point where we can answer these questions in a way that we're vulnerable, And again, these things all kind of build on each other, right? So if you're willing to take risk, if you're willing to operate in grace, if you're willing to ask bold questions expecting honest answers, then you yourself have to be willing to give honest answers and demonstrate that vulnerability that was built up through through taking risk and through operating in grace. Remember, we operate in grace because we're vulnerable to Christ, right? Because of what he did for us, we're made vulnerable to him.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, everything's bared in front of you. There's no hiding from you. You know all the dirt, and so I know the quick response is, but that's Jesus. That's not this person. But the reality is, I'm not asking you to or anyone to go and tell everybody all their business. But there's got to be some. There's got to be a handful of folks that you're being willing to be vulnerable with, and not only ask them bold questions, but answer the bold questions honestly.
Absolutely, and I know this is a little bit tougher when it comes to pastors and likewise, like leaders of the church, right? Because you go and share with somebody who's a layman or just just somebody from the congregation, right? Who doesn't know the Lord or doesn't. Well, why am I listening to him if he's all busted and disgusted, right? So they're held to almost like, well, he can't be doing this because he has to be this, right? So it's tougher, but I say almost more necessary for pastors to be honest with their answers, because it's a easily slippery slope for pastors to burn themselves out.
Absolutely.
To work so hard and never receive I don't want to say recognition, because I know the recognition is from the Lord, but it's often an awesome thing for your congregation, your members, to show the love that you showed them back. But you guys run yourselves ragged. You're in the fray. So to take Matt Chandler's John, you guys need something back, and this being honest actually gives the real believers, the real people who want to be discipled, who want to walk alongside of you, the opportunity to be that shoulder, to be that sounding board, to be that vent that you desperately need.
No, I agree. I mean, I think one of the things that pastors or any really leader in general, you don't want to walk around trying to wear the cape. You don't want to. You're not Superman. You're not Superwoman, Wonder Woman, whatever. That's not who you are. And I think it helps other believers in a way when you're willing to be vulnerable and say, yo, listen, I'm struggling. And I think, if you want to try to lay down some ground rules here, kind of on 1,000 feet level, if you're going to answer these questions honestly, that means answer them honestly. That doesn't mean, so if you ask me, hey, how you doing? And I say, I'm just really, I'm having some marital problems, and can you just pray for that? That's not true. The reality is I'm on the verge of divorce, and I need somebody to step in here and try to help me work through this. I'm just having marital problems. That can mean anything. That can mean, you and your wife had a fight over what was for dinner. That can mean, you and your spouse had some kind of issue over who was supposed to take the car to get the oil change. That can mean anything. So don't use these kind of on the surface answers to answer without answering.
Well, I told him that I was having marital issues. No, the extent,
right?
The degree.
Be honest. Be honest. Lay it on the table.
And if we're gonna set some rules, this is active participation. This is the reality of small group. This is the opportunity of small group. Let me put it like that. Everybody says, well, what should I do? Because there's a line there, right? Like, all right, how far is too far? What is too close?
6 feet.
Absolutely. But spiritually, emotionally, for pastors, for congregants, what's too close, what's not too close,
Right.
what's considered overstepping your bounds, what's not considered, like what's not intervening, what are those lines that we have to define that in a big church might not be necessary, well, are absolutely necessary for safety issues, but in a small church, those lines get blurred. Sometimes those lines aren't existent. Sometimes those lines are too existent, where there is no intimacy or growth because the pastor's too distant. We have to define those lines a little bit and know that what goes for us should go for our pastors, and so on and so forth, right? Just as we need, our pastors are human, and they need the grace that they give to us. They need the honesty that they give to us, that we should be asking and requiring the honesty back from them. And also giving them opportunities to be human, showing grace to them, not putting them on this pedestal that anything can knock them off and no longer be effective in the works of God. That's not true. That's not real.
Right. That's not the way it works. And I mean, and this applies to whoever runs in your circle. You know what I'm saying? You happen to be somebody who runs in the circle of a pastor. You know, you're my friend. You're my best friend. And so, his best friend, single tier. But that's just the way it is. You know, it's not something you asked for, sought out. It's not something. That's just your space. That's where you are. And you know, other people might not be the friend of a pastor. You might just be working with just a quote unquote regular group of Christians. But that doesn't change the reality that these things that he lays out here are vital. And I think the last 2 points, you can kind of put them together. Yeah. The fact that if you're going to be asking bold questions and you're going to be answering honestly, that you're going to have to do these two things, which is asking for help, and the help, when it's given, whoever's giving it, it should be sacrificial. It should be sacrificial.
Now, these two are so important, right? Because this makes or breaks everything else, right? So those other things are foundational to an extent, but these things coming up right now are so important, because you can do all those things, right, and then drop the ball on this, and the rest of that work was for nothing, right? The idea, and I'm just imploring you guys, begging you guys, the reality is that help is vital, not only for the person who needs the help, but for the person who is sacrificially helping. And the word sacrificial help is so, take time to look at that word. Helping out of convenience is nice. It's fine, right? But what is it costing you? Jesus came to help in an inconvenient way. Like it literally cost him his life.
And I think you know, when you think about that, right? When you think about the fact that Jesus, what he did sets the foundation for what we're called to do, right? I think that's when the reality of things start rolling here. That when somebody comes and they're struggling, and you kind of get through those questions, and it settles down, and you realize, all right, this is what we're dealing with here. All right, we finally are at the core of this thing. That's where, like you said, the make or break point happens, where, okay, you can help, but it's going to cost you to help. And all of a sudden, the thought process has to start working. You know, are you all in here? Are you all in on helping this person that you say that you love, that you go and serve Christ with, that you go and worship with? Are you all in when the help isn't just you saying,
Bendito.
When the help is you having to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning and meeting up with them and praying with them. When the help is you having to financially invest in them. When the help is you having to get up on your own and fast and pray without anybody else knowing, and tears and crying. And when the help starts becoming something that costs you something, are you still willing to cross into that place?
And this has to be said. Not again. I know she's my pastor, but not to blow her up. But that's an opportunity where we get to look at Pastor Nosa, Mama Nosa, Nosa, and see something like that actually laid out.
Absolutely.
To look at her, you would say, all right. But to know the efforts, the lengths, she goes through. And again, nobody will. She doesn't boast about it. She doesn't put it on her Instagram. She doesn't. There's
Instagram. What's that?
Any social media. She doesn't go out showing or telling. But the lives, the things that she's touched, the people that she's extended her hand to, with no desire of any, just love God. Like, don't worry about giving anything back to me. Love God. Like, pay it forward to God. Pay it forward to God. Like, just invest in Jesus. Spend time. Like, for myself, for the countless of families in the church, you see that out there. Mm-hmm. Like, I know you and your wife are like, just going for it. You know what I'm saying? And doing some awesome things like that. Those are some of the benefits of the small church, right? But when we talk about sacrificial help, it's not always, I think you put it the best way. It's going to cost you something. It's going to make you, all those other four, it's going to find out if those were true or if they were lip service.
Right, exactly. It's gonna make the cream rise to the crop. It's gonna, whatever is there is what's
perfect.
is what's gonna come up.
It's gonna show what you really are. It's gonna show the intention of everything else.
It's a biblical idea where Paul talks about how they're gonna throw this thing in the fire and those impurities kind of rise to the surface, and you're gonna see what's there when you're thrown into the heat of having to help somebody who you claim to love. Because all of a sudden you're gonna see, oh man, I'm selfish, or like I don't. Oh my gosh, I'm not going down that road with them.
6 o'clock again?
What now? So, and I think that's when the realities start to show up of, how much of what I believe is honestly ingrained in me, and how much of what I believe is just lip service, right? Just kind of on the surface. And so I think when you're in these kind of groups, whether it's small groups from a bigger church or whether you're in a small church like we are, it's important that these things start becoming a reality. But those first things, like we said, those first four things kind of fall flat if when you get to this step, you're not willing to go that extra mile.
Yeah, and that's when that fire exposes something bad. But what you're left with, bro, what you're left with is...
He's more important than I am.
What you're left with after that is so awesome because it's that refined gold.
Yeah, exactly.
It's that precious metal that where you'll see what that pastor's worth, what that leader's worth, what that brother, what that sister's worth. And what you're worth to them, actually. Exactly. Because they were willing to go there at 12 o'clock,
right, whatever it was.
They were willing to step out there. They were willing to take the blanket. They were willing to take the financial hit.
That's where you start seeing things really start rolling when you're a part of something where you feel like you are loved and cared for. And all of this, as we get ready to close here, all of this, right, stems from what was done for us, right?
It paints the perfect picture. It gives you a picture of Christ.
It all stems from what was done for us. And so when we sit back and think, well, why do I have to do this? Why? Listen, the reason we're trying to lead you down this road is not because we think it sounds cute or it's kind of cool or however you want to phrase it. It's because it was what was done for us. Someone came along, saw us in need, and was willing to go as far as you could go to meet that need. Namely, that person was Christ, and namely what he did was go to the cross for us. And so for us as believers, that's why we have to look at this and say, oh, this isn't just them trying to foster some kind of group therapy session. This is them trying to do what Jesus did for us. And one more thing, and I think is really important, is that as believers, and I think this is where it starts getting real, even more real than already. What we've already talked about is that this isn't something that you get to do one time and then put up gold star, I win, it's over.
I helped him last year, so right. I'm good. I'm good for my year.
This is a lifestyle of you're going to be in this kind of scenario. I don't want to say daily, but continuously. It's going to come. It's going to come. It's going to come, and you got to be willing to trust God enough that he's going to lead you to make the choices that need to be made.
Absolutely. Listen, why do it? Because it's the embodiment of what we're called. We're Christians, Christ-like, right? The reality is, why do it? Because we're called. This is what we're called. This is the name we're claiming, and this is the object of what he wants done, right? He wants you to be examples of what he was to us, right? An extreme example of love, right? also, the cool thing is, and you'll get this in the disciples, is that they started to do the same. So the picture there is painted that you won't have to do it a million times. Now, God may call you to do it a million times, but if you're doing it and doing it effectively and rightly, biblically, you're going to create people who are willing to do it with you.
Amen.
Right? Because of the example your mom and dad left you, you and your wife are embodying that now, right? Because of the example you guys have left me and my family, me and my wife are trying to be Christians in the sense of reaching out, stepping out, standing with people, just doing the things that we were called to do by the grace of God.
And it's not because any of us are some kind of
special people.
Right.
We're not. I told you, A1 sinner.
All this is just a desire to find joy in Jesus. You know, that's what it boils down to. And so if you want to see our church grow, if you want to see your church grow, if you want to see your group of believers grow, I would encourage you to find the article by Barnabas Piper, read it. But more than just read it, kind of do it. You know, actually do it. Listen to some of the things that we talked about here today. Know that we don't got this thing all figured out, not even close to it. But we know something is good. You know something's good when you see it, right? Like something is real when you see it. And so this is one of those things. Being able to be a part of something like this, that's good.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
That's what we want for
absolutely. Everyone. I think Pastor Joe said it greatly. Shout out to Barnabas Piper. If he ever listens to this, we were touched and blessed by your article. But with all that being said, we just want to give out good information and share with you guys, right? Pastor Joe said we are not perfect. We are imperfect people, just by nature. That's what we are right now, right? But we're finding opportunities to be blessings and do what God has called us to do. Amen. So if you like this, guys, please hit the like button. If we messed up on anything, if there's any issues with what you heard or you need clarification, please hit us up on the comments. We'll do our best to get back to you. Again, remember to be gracious as we are prone to fail.
Yeah, absolutely.
But if you guys enjoyed it, please let other people see it. Please let other people watch it. The beard challenge is still up there, so let me know.
All right. Peace out, y'all.